Research ethics and integrity. Research ethics is defined as the study or science of right and wrong, of what one ought to do when confronted with conflicting values or obligations. Um, Very basic. Yes, we have all these things written down. I've talked a lot with my students about this, but it's really the study of right and wrong. What do you do in a certain situation? Um, I couldn't help but think this week as I was looking some things that was going on and um, in situations where people might need help. I don't know if you feel the same way I do, but in right or wrong, I'm going to be there to help that person if they need my help. I used to pray, God, please don't let my son get caught in a situation where he has to be a hero. Mothers do that because you know what? If he was walking past a house and someone said, and it was burning, and someone said, there's a child left in that house, my son was going in because I knew what kind of person he was, and he knew the difference in right and wrong. And so research ethics gets down to the study of right or wrong. Now, integrity is a commitment to intellectual honesty and personal responsibility. Um, I have looked at different studies that says people who do research, 25% of individuals that do research will lie, which is amazing to me. And when you think about research with drugs, the drug companies, which as much as professors do, drug companies probably do as much research. And, if 25% would lie, because they're going to make a lot of money off that research. So research integrity has to be something that is ingrained within a person. And then responsible conduct, it's just doing research in a manner that goes along with our professional responsibilities and our professional ethics. Because you will find once you become a therapist, you will have to have so many hours of ethics every single year to renew your license because they want to make absolutely sure that you are following your practice in an ethical manner. Here are 9 core areas of responsible conduct in research. How you acquire your data. What about your mentor-trainee relationship? If you have people under you that are helping you carry out your research. Publication practices, responsible authorship. Is it peer-reviewed? Do you make sure that you have other people? I do a lot of peer reviewing for journals, and they want to make sure that this is done correctly and honestly and carried out in a way that you could put a stamp of approval on it if you were a journal. It's a collaborative science. Not only do you work with other individuals in your field, you may be paid by someone to do research, and you want to make sure you're constantly collaborating with them. You have to respect your human subjects. What about research involving animals? We could do a whole hours of study on animal research. I've been involved in debates on animal research. Now, I'm an animal lover, so it can get very tricky, but you also have to appreciate that they are trying to provide drugs, because usually it's drug research on animals. They are trying to provide drugs that work well on humans. Understanding what is research misconduct. Maybe we could just lie a little bit. Maybe we could just say this worked when it didn't work all the time. So you have to understand misconduct. And the last is conflict of interest. Again, who's paying you to do the research? Of course, drug companies, if you're doing research, of course, they want it to be good. They want it because they're going to make $1 billion off of it. But you've got to make sure you remember your own personal integrity, and if there's a conflict of interest in your research. Your responsibilities. You have personal responsibilities as a researcher. There are different aspects that affect that. Think about your research question. Remember, I gave you some research questions. And how would this research question affect my human participants? I told you I was using wellness, stress, and mattering in my study. How using those types of instruments, how might that affect a ninth grader? How are you going to design your study all the way through until the end? What methodology are you going to use? The instrumentation you use to collect? On all three of those variables I talked about, I had to find a way to measure wellness. And I did find a wonderful instrument that looked at adolescent wellness. And then mattering. Well, how am I going to measure if these individuals really feel like they matter? And so I was able to find something, but you have to think about how that's going to affect your subjects. And the last consideration is the possible risk to participants by participating in your research. Is there a risk here? And if it is, what are those possible risks? And do the risk outweigh the results? And so it's really thinking through all your responsibilities in a research study. You've got to make sure that you take steps to minimize those risks. Almost always, you make sure at the end of your study you check on your participants and you make sure that completing all that information has not created some type of mental issue within them. The actual data collection process. When you present them with informed consent, is it developmentally appropriate for them? The confidentiality procedures you use to protect them is really important and one of your responsibilities. How are you going to share the results and what you're going to do to withhold that study throughout the entire study that you're using. I know some of this sounds a little redundant, but it just wants to make sure over and over again that you understand what are your responsibilities as a researcher. Now, there are 4 studies that we're going to look at, and it will really make you think. You think, well, ethics, not that important in research. Oh, it really is. And these are 4 studies from the 20th century that led to the development of today's ethical standards to protect human rights. The first one is the Nazi medical war studies. And this is in World War II, and you all know about the Holocaust and the Jews during World War II and the horrible things that were done to them in the name of research. They were given poison, they were given gasoline to drink, they were immersed in cold water. It was really horrible what they did, and they did it in the name of research. Then the Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, this began in 1932, and probably the study that moved Congress more to do something about unethical research. This was 600 Black men, 400 who had syphilis, 200 that did not. Now, they lied to them, and they told them they were going to treat the syphilis to the 400 that did have syphilis, but instead, they wanted to see how certain things affect individuals that had syphilis and those that did not. This is one of the longest studies. It went on for 40 years. Now, and this began in 1932. In 1940, penicillin was found. And they could have given these individuals penicillin and cured them. But this study went all the way to 1972. And then you had the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital Study. This was a hospital in New York City in 1963. That hasn't been that long ago when you think about it. They were actually injecting their people in the hospital with live cancer cells and were not telling them what they were doing. And so, again, this was one of those studies that people said we cannot have this kind of thing in research. And the last one is a Willowbrook study. There used to be a wonderful video out there, but they've taken that video down. The Willowbrook study was a school for mentally challenged children. And of course, these individuals needed help with their children. So to be put in the school, they had to agree that their children would be injected with hepatitis. It's hard to believe, but they did this to these children. Now, Geraldo Rivera, I know some of you don't know him because he's an older reporter, but this was during the time Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General. And so he was told about what was going on with the Willowbrook study, and Geraldo Rivera took his cameras in and did a report. It was horrific, just horrific. And so they were able to close the school and stop the horrible things that were going on. So all of these things helped people get very serious about what they could do in research. And so the National Commission, it's a long name, National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavior Research, was created. And this commission wrote the Belmont Report, which is the cornerstone document of ethical principles. And mostly because of the Tuskegee study, but the other things were involved in this also. So there were 3 principles of this report that had to be found and researched, and this report stands today. Number 1 is autonomy. That is respect for the individual, their opinions, their thoughts, and their choices. Number 2 is beneficence. That is the art of doing good. Do no harm. Number 3 is justice. And that was simply fairness in your research study. And so because of this report, people began to have to do research differently. Now, for institutions, universities, they began institutional review boards, are called IRB. And if you do any research within a university, you have to get that approved by the IRB. And it's pretty intensive. Since I did my research on adolescents, it was much more difficult to get it through. I changed it and changed it. It took me about 6 months to get that through the IRB board. If you do adolescents or the elderly, any type of population that needed special care, it takes longer to get that through. But they are now those type of things that protect individuals from being used and abused and hurt and harmed in research. So this session has looked at those contemporary issues and also some of the ethical issues.